أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم سبحانك اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وعنده مفاتح الغيب لا يعلمها إلا هو ويعلم ما في البر والبحر وما تسقط من ورقة إلا يعلمها ولا حبة في ظلمات الأرض ولا رطب ولا يابس إلا في كتاب مبين. Today will be a little bit different. I'm going to continue with the Sirah discussion, but then after that I want to address the day or the occasion of Ashura, because that's going to be another day. So we'll have both of those. I'll try to be compact, and then we can have Q&A. Continuing in our discussion of the Sirah, we are now in the final months of the 7th year of the Hijrah, and we will talk about the opening months of the 8th year of the Hijrah. The background for the last 2 lectures has been what resulted after the Treaty of Al-Hudaybiyah. And we talked about how after the Prophet ﷺ was able to neutralize the threat from Quraysh by signing this peace treaty, he was able to focus on the other fronts that were concerning him. One where it was some of the Jewish tribes that threatened Medina from the north. So we talked about Khaybar. And then there are 2 other areas of concern. One was, or what we will talk about today, is the Byzantium or the Romans in the far north and their allies in the far north. Also, some of the tribes in the far east of the Arabian Peninsula, what we would refer today as Najd or Riyadh, that area. So now the Prophet ﷺ is focusing on, Mecca was the most immediate threat. Now he's focusing on neutralizing these other threats. So we begin the discussion in the month of Rabi' al-Awwal in the 7th year of the Hijrah, in which this important battle took place called Dhat al-Riqaq. Some of the Sirah authors say that it took place in the 4th year of the Hijrah, but there are some Sahaba that were present, like Abu Hurairah, for example, who had just become Muslims. So this would mean that this battle fell most likely in the 7th year, which is why we're discussing it now. There was about 400 to 700 riders, different narrations, or troops that the Prophet ﷺ took. And this was a 2-day journey towards the area of Ghatafan. And Ghatafan, we mentioned before, was important because Khaybar united with some of the tribes of Ghatafan against Medina. So now the Prophet ﷺ is going to neutralize that threat. This was a victory, a victorious battle, but there are a couple of stories that emerge from this that are maybe you're familiar with, so it's worth discussing or mentioning. The first story is that the Sahaba would usually, when they would camp, they would find a tree that was suitable for shade, and they would leave that for the Prophet ﷺ to rest, and they would find other places to rest. So the Prophet ﷺ, he had no personal bodyguards. After the revelation of the verse, Wallahu ya'asumuka minan nas, Allah will protect you from people. So the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't walk around with an entourage or personal guards or anything like that. So he was sleeping under the tree and he hung his sword. And one of the enemy combatants made their way into the camp, and he grabbed the Prophet's sword, ﷺ, and he unsheathed it and he put it in the Prophet's face, ﷺ, and he woke him up and he said, "Are you scared of me?" And the Prophet ﷺ said, "No." And then he said, "Who will protect you from me?" And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Allah." And when the Prophet ﷺ said that, the man kind of got thrown off his game and he accidentally dropped the sword. So the Prophet ﷺ picked up the sword and he said, "Who's going to save you from me?" And then the man said the Shahada, and he was saved. It's a pretty, intense story. Sometimes we say them very quickly, as I've said in the past, and we reflect on what the state of the Prophet was, to wake up to that, not to be startled. Many of us, we wake up in the middle of the night and we're startled if we hear something, or if it starts raining, or if there's thunder, if the lightning is really loud. Simple things, normal human reaction. This is even more than that, and his initial response was, "I'm not scared. Allah is going to protect me." So this tells us something about the state of the Prophet ﷺ, and therefore the impact that he's having on people. Because it makes sense that the man will drop his sword, because now the opposite was supposed to happen. The Prophet ﷺ was supposed to freak out and give up. But because of his reaction, the men got scared. I wasn't expecting this at all. So the psychology part is important. The other story that's commonly referred to, which happened at this battle, is actually on the way back. They had taken some of the people captive. One of the people that was taken captive was a woman. And this woman's husband had vowed that he would exact some kind of revenge and therefore, seek to draw blood from the Muslims. As they were coming back, one of the jobs of the troops is that somebody has to be the night watchman. So somebody has to, I know this is not a reference to Game of Thrones, but someone actually had to watch the troops at night. So there were two Sahaba that were watching at night, Abed ibn Bishr and Ammar ibn Yasir radiallahu anhuma. And Abed was praying. He was just doing like tahajjud prayer. And this man came and he shot an arrow and it hit Abed in the leg. But he didn't move, or he finished his prayer. So Ammar, after all of this, and they captured the guy, Ammar said, "Why didn't you tell me? You're like bleeding, and like I feel the warm blood from your body and all of that." And he said, "I was reciting this beautiful surah. I didn't want to stop it." Again, it shows you what these people's relationship was to the Quran, for example. And they lived in these things. For us, sometimes it's ceremonial, but for them, they lived it. They lived in that energy that the Quran provided, and the meanings that the verses provided, and the energy around the Prophet, and they lived in that. So when you understand that, you can understand how they can do things like this. So to make sense of these things, you need to understand their interaction. So those are two stories that I think people have mentioned before. So even though this battle was a victory and it was small, this created a lot of fear for Ghatafan, because one of the things that the Prophet ﷺ did overall since arriving in Medina is he did not leave the threats open. If there was a threat, he would address it. Whether he would march to them, whether he would, with the letters to the other kings and Kisra and all of that, the Prophet ﷺ was forward in his strategy. So because of this, Ghatafan actually kind of gave up. And even though this wasn't like this massive military victory, it was over for Ghatafan. They just crumbled. And all throughout when this happens, think of that verse when Allah says, وَتَحْسَبُهُمْ جَمِيعًا وَقُلُوبُهُمْ شَتَّى. You think that they are united, but their hearts are scattered. And that's really the difference. That these people are the people that if they get stabbed, they're going to finish reading the Quran. These are the people that when the Prophet made wudu, they would go to run, to grab the water that fell from him. The other people they didn't have that. They maybe were plentiful in numbers and had resources and agricultural resources and wealth and weapons and things like that, but they weren't really in it to win it, the way that the Muslims of Medina were. So this battle kind of took care of Ghatafan. And as a matter of fact, not only that, but many of the tribes of Ghatafan came into Islam after this. And that's why a lot of the Ghatafani tribes marched with the people of Medina when the Prophet ﷺ conquered Mecca a couple of years later and fought the rest of the battles with the Prophet ﷺ. After the return from this battle, we said this was in about Rabi' al-Awwal of the year 7, the Prophet ﷺ remained in Medina until Shawwal of that year, so several months in a row. And during that time, there were about 8 other military excursions. I'm not going to go through them, they're very minor, but there is one story that I want to mention from one of those excursions because of the lessons. And this was the excursion led by Ghalib ibn Abdullah al-Laythi, radiallahu anhu. And during this battle, Usama ibn Zayd, radiallahu anhu, this is the story in which he killed this guy who had just said the Shahada. So the man was, he lost the duel, and Usama is about to kill him, and before he strikes him, the man, declares his shahada, and then he kills him. The man's name was Mirdad ibn Nahik, and when the Prophet ﷺ heard this story, he was furious. He kept saying to Usama, "Did you kill a man who said La ilaha illallah?" And Usama said, the Prophet ﷺ kept repeating that so much, I just wished, the earth would swallow me. I was so ashamed at what I had done. And the reason I mentioned this story is that one of the traits that Islam advocates that's not necessarily popular in the way the modern world is we take things at face value. So if somebody says they're a Muslim, then they're a Muslim. So many times people come to me and say, oh, he only said that because he's getting married to this sister. So that's not my business. He said he's a Muslim, he's a Muslim. I don't need to investigate that. Our job is not to investigate what's inside each other. That's for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, in certain cases you have to investigate if you're in law enforcement or in court. I understand that, but I mean in our social life. We just take things the way they are. If somebody says something, then okay, it is what it is. We take that at face value. So if somebody declares their faith, then that's it, they're a Muslim. And that's why many Orientalists were able to camouflage themselves and go to Mecca and Medina and describe the Hajj. We have early descriptions of the Hajj from Orientalists because no one questioned them. There's no investigation like at the border. Are you really Muslim? You don't look Muslim, whatever that means. Recite the Fatiha or say, they're just like, you're Muslim. They probably didn't even ask. They were just, allowed in. So this is something that is important and worth remembering. I think that it would make some of our social problems easier. This does not mean that we should be foolish or naive. Don't take that from it. But when we deal with people, we should be able to deal with people at face value. The next major episode happens in Dhul Qa'dah. Now we're getting towards the end of the 7th year, in which the Prophet ﷺ ordered all of the people that were with him at Hudaybiyah to return to Mecca to perform their Umrah. Now this was part of the treaty that the Quraysh would allow the Prophet ﷺ to come back, perform Umrah, and stay for 3 days. And on the note of not being naive, the Prophet ﷺ took all of the weapons with him. So he said, just in case, because I can't trust these people. And the Prophet ﷺ is the one that said that the believer is not stung twice. Right? And in English, we even have that statement, that expression, you fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. So the Prophet ﷺ said the Muslim is not stung twice. So the Prophet ﷺ was not a foolish person. He was not like some naive, weak person. Very strategic thing. They took all their weapons with them. And not only that, as they entered Mecca, there's about 2,000 of them. As they entered Mecca, the Prophet ﷺ left the weapons outside of Mecca, because you can't come into Mecca with weapons. And he left 200 people to guard them, just in case. So that's a force. So, he's not being stung twice. Alhamdulillah, they were able to perform their Umrah. And this is where we get some of the manasik, some of the rites. The Qurayshis, they're so disgusted with the Muslims that they left Mecca. They're like, we're going to vacate the city and leave it for the Muslims to do their thing. And they spread all of these rumors that the Muslims are sick, the Muslims are weak, the Muslims are this, the Muslims are that. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, okay, all the men, we're going to take our right shoulder, expose our right shoulder when we enter into the Haram. This is why when we put on the Hajj or the Ihram clothing for the men, not the women, please. The men, we expose our right shoulder, right? And then the Prophet ﷺ, he did something else. He said the first 3 tawaf, we're going to run. We're going to jog. It's actually a sunnah. Now it's impossible to do that. You'd be lucky if your feet just stay on the ground when you're making the tawaf. But at that time, there weren't so many people, it was possible. It's actually a sunnah for the first 3 to run. And then also the part of the sa'i between Safa and Marwa, there's, now it's marked by those green markers. You run lightly in between those, was all to play this psychological game with the Qurayshis. So when the Qurayshis saw them, they saw their skin, they said they don't have any spots or anything like that. Look, all they're doing is running. They can eat us. It was like a psychological thing for them. They had tried to build up this image that the Prophet ﷺ is weak, that the Muslims are weak. But then they see them, muscular and running, around the Kaaba and between Safa and Marwa. It was a psychological victory. They sent a notice to Imam Ali alayhi salam. They said, tell your Prophet that, okay, your 3 days are up, it's time to leave. So the Prophet ﷺ abided by what he was given. And on his way back, this is in which the marriage of the Prophet ﷺ and Lady Maymuna alayhi salam takes place. And after they return, before the close of the year, there are 4 more minor battles. So it's a lot of battles. 8 previously, and now between the 11th month, or the 12th month rather, the 11th month and the end of the year, basically less than 2 months, there were 4 skirmishes. So there was a lot of open threats to Medina that the Prophet ﷺ was taking care of. We cross over now into the 8th year of the Hijrah. So now we're really getting towards the end of the Prophet's life, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And in the month of Jamad al-Awwal, in the 8th year of the Hijrah, which corresponds to August and September of the year 629 of the Common Era, the largest battle in the Sirah of the Prophet ﷺ took place. And this is the Battle of Mu'tah, which is the first skirmish, or the first major battle rather, between the Muslims and the Roman Empire, the Byzantines. And this is really, really significant because this is an introduction to what will happen after the passing of the Prophet ﷺ, vis-a-vis the Muslims and the Persians, and the Muslims and the Romans. And remember that the Byzantines is also referred to as the Eastern Roman Empire. So they're interchangeable. So this is really the West. This is a major military engagement and really foreshadows what will happen a few centuries later with the collapse of the Eastern Roman Empire and the fall of Constantinople to the Muslims. The story behind this is that the Prophet ﷺ had sent an ambassador, Al-Harith ibn Umayr, to Busra, which we mentioned way back in the beginning of the Sirah, that this was what Amina, the mother of the Prophet ﷺ, said that she could see as she was giving birth to the Prophet ﷺ. She said, I saw it was lit between Mecca and Al-Busra. And this city was the first, or area which is in southern Syria today, it was the first part of the Levant to fall to Islam. So that's the significance of the Milad story of mentioning Busra. So the Prophet ﷺ sent this ambassador to Busra, and the Levant area was controlled. It was part of the Roman Empire, but it was controlled by the Ghassanids. So they are the overseers that are in alignment with the Byzantines, with the Romans, to oversee the Levant. So the leader of this area, he killed the Prophet's ambassador. So even back then, there's something called diplomatic immunity. You can't do that. To kill an ambassador is an act of war. It's a declaration of war. It's serious. And because of this, the Prophet ﷺ amassed the largest army up to this date, which was 3,000 people. We've come a long way from Badr. Badr was 313, 312. Now we're 3,000, which was a stretch, huge stretch for the Muslims at this time, to respond to that act of aggression. Now think about that. That's crazy. If we were in that situation, we would not, tickle the bear. We would totally, okay, the guy got killed. That's really unfortunate. We would just, let's hope that nothing happens. This is a superpower. This is huge. So the Prophet ﷺ, again, he's forward in his strategy. We have to respond. So 3,000 people under the leadership of Zayd ibn Haritha, radiallahu anhu. The Prophet ﷺ, he gave the leadership of this army to Zayd, and he said, Zayd, if you fall, it goes to Ja'far. Ja'far, if you fall, it goes to Abdullah ibn Rawaha, radiallahu anhu. And the flag was white. In this story of this battle, there is the very elaborate hadith that talk about the rules of engagement of war. So the Prophet ﷺ was very, very clear. You go, you respond to aggression, you call to Islam, you do not disturb old people, you do not disturb the environment, you do not disturb the priests and the monks in their churches. And the Prophet said, Sawama, he would use the words of the holy places. So this battle and others, but this one, more than the other ones, is where we get our literature about what the Sharia, how the Sharia begins to think about just war, rules of engagement, and there are a lot of rules of engagement. There are so many rules of engagement that one could fathom to make the argument that modern warfare in its entirety is not compatible with our ethical system. And I think a lot of other religions would say the same thing. But anyway, a lot of rules of engagement, the Prophet ﷺ was very clear about what the goal is. He said, don't forget why you're going, don't forget who we are, don't forget our values. The Muslims, as we've mentioned throughout, they have intelligence gathering capacity. Their intelligence reports came in that the Byzantines, the Romans, had amassed troops of 200,000. 200,000, and they're only 3,000, and they're marching south. So they're not waiting, they're marching south to meet the Muslims. So Zayd, and he's like, okay, we got to talk about this. So he gets the top guys, and what are we going to do? Should we write to the Prophet ﷺ? Maybe he can send us some reinforcements. But even if they send reinforcements, how many? Is it going to go from 3,000 to what? Or maybe he'll give us some other instructions, wink, wink, as in come back. So Abdullah, who was the number 3 in command, he went all all in. He says, no, we have something greater than our numbers. We have our belief. We have this religion. We have our ethics. We have the Prophet. He rallied everyone up, and they said, yeah, we're going to go do it. We're not going to write the Prophet. We're going to go and we're going to fight. He's like, look, what's the worst that can happen? We die. That's actually what we want. We want the shahada. We want that. We're all in it. So they go, and they fight. And this is a massive, massive military engagement. I mean, you're talking about 3,000 Muslims against 200,000 The Romans, man, they've been tearing up half the earth for nearly a millennia at this point. They're trained. They're trained. Zayd fights until he is killed. Ja'far picks up the flag and he fights. Not only is he killed, but the hadith says that the Roman soldier who killed Ja'far cut him in half. Cut him in half. And the Sahaba, they said after all of this was over, when they went to find the bodies of their dead, they found that he had over 90 hits on the front on his torso, and not one in his back. Meaning that he was just taking it and fighting it. Can you imagine? I mean, that's stuff that you see like in Gladiator or something. He was actually cut in half. That's who they were fighting. Ja'far falls, and when the Prophet ﷺ heard this, he said that Allah Ta'ala has replaced because his limbs were cut off before he was cut in half. The Prophet ﷺ said that his arms were replaced with wings, and he is flying in paradise. And that's why Ja'far is called Ja'far al-Tayyar, alayhi salam. He was from the family of the Prophet ﷺ. And by the way, while this was all happening, the Prophet ﷺ has his own revelation FaceTime capacity. So he's telling the companions in Medina what's happening. So the Prophet ﷺ is seeing this in real time, even though he's in Medina. So Ja'far radiallahu anhu alayhi salam, he falls. Abdullah takes the flag and he fights until he falls. This is crazy. It's mayhem, it's bloodshed. The 3 commanders fell. So now the flag, and we talked about the importance of the flag in the middle of the battle. The flag fell, so the Muslims are almost going to break apart. And then who's going to take it? And then Khalid ibn Walid steps up and he grabs the flag. And the Prophet ﷺ, he says, remember, he's seeing this, from Allah allows him to see it. He says that one of the swords of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taken the flag. Now Khalid, radiallahu anhu, he's a military genius. I mean, by all, even in Western assessments of the ancient world, usually Khalid is mentioned as a general from our history, our tradition, for somebody for his military genius. So he's like, look, I mean, okay, we're not going to win. This is, clearly we're going to die. We're going to be annihilated here. So what he does is towards the end of the day now, when he grabs the flag and they stop fighting. What he does, he said, okay, we talked about in the beginning how sometimes the army was put in little groups. There was a front group, a back group, one on the right, one on the left, and in the center. It was cut in 5. So Khalid, he reversed everything. He put the people in the front and the back, and brought the people in the back and the front. He put the right on the left and the left on the right. He switched them all up. So the next day, when the sun rose, the Romans thought that there had been reinforcements because they didn't see the same setup. They didn't see the same people. So the Romans started to get scared. Now they got reinforcements because they thought, this was like Thermopylae. I mean, there's 3,000 against 200,000, and they're fighting and they're excited, and so the Romans are not that excited. They're just these are paid soldiers. So the Romans started to get scared. So instead of advancing, Khalid takes a step back. And then the Romans take a step back. Khalid takes another step back. The Romans take a step back. They keep doing that until they can't see each other, and then he returns to Medina. So he saves the army. He saves the army, and in the statistics that we have of the dead, we lost 12. We don't have any hadith that tells us. I couldn't find necessarily any Roman sources that would tell us about how many fell from the Romans, but we know that it was probably more than the 12 that we lost. So even from that point of view, not necessarily a victory, but talk about street cred. I mean, after this, now Islam, the Prophet ﷺ, okay, this is nothing that we can ignore. The Quraysh learned that lesson the hard way, but now the Romans are hearing this lesson. 3,000 against 200,000. And that's just, even when I'm like reading, I'm like, this is unbelievable that they did this. And they turned it into a psychological victory. All right, so this is a big foreshadowing to what's going to happen later in the early Islamic history. So there's a lot to be said for Khalid ibn Walid, radiallahu anh, by the way. One of the things that, and he was a hard enemy against the Prophet at one point. So it was a huge victory for Islam that he became Muslim. He used to put a hair that belonged to the Prophet in his cap when he was in battle. And he said, I would never lose a battle as long as the hair of the Prophet is in my cap. So even though he's this hardened military strategist, general, fighter, warrior, all of that, he still had that spiritual side to him. He still was connected to that movement. The following month, Jumad al-Akhirah, in the year 8 of the Hijrah, will end with this today. This was the Battle of Salasil, or Sulasil, you can pronounce it 2 ways. And this was a reaction to Mu'tah for the Prophet ﷺ trying to sever any Arab-Roman alliance. So we mentioned that the people in the Levant, the Ghassanids, these are a proxy for the Romans. They were Roman troops, but they were also the proxy. So the Prophet ﷺ wants to split any alliance so that they never have to face these odds again. The Prophet ﷺ said, Amr ibn al-As, radiallahu anhu, and again, this was a military, he needed reinforcements, they won, and this severed the tie to any possible threat that like such a massive group of people in the Sham area would be able to attack the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And with that, we'll end today. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam wa a'lam. The other thing I wanted to talk about, as I said in the beginning, is I want to talk about Ashura. Monday is the 10th of Muharram, and I want to talk a little bit about what that day means for us, why it's significant, why it's important, and I also want to talk a little bit about the Sunni Shia thing, because now it's a lot of people are. It's much more of an issue now that I think our community needs to address. The first thing to say about Ashura, and maybe to make life easier, I can reference myself. I guess now I can do that with this community. That if you listen to podcast episode, episode 33 talks about Ashura and all of like the dhikr and stuff that you can say in the day of Ashura. But basically, when the Prophet ﷺ came to Medina, remember he came to Medina, he entered Medina on Rabi' al-Awwal, on his birthday. So it wasn't until the following Muharram that this happened, in which the Prophet ﷺ saw the Jews fasting. Now, the day of Ashura is equivalent to the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur. And Ashura means the 10th, Ashura, the 10th day of Muharram. And for the Jews, the month is Tishri, the first month of their year, and it was on the 10th of Tishri that they were fasting this day, Yom Kippur. So the Prophet saw them fasting, and until today, Jews fast. And he said, why do you fast on this day? And the Jews said, this is the day we celebrate, or we commemorate, and we honor that Moses fled from Pharaoh and saved the people of Israel. So the Prophet ﷺ said, I have more of a right to Moses than you, because I'm a prophet and Moses is a prophet. So the Prophet ﷺ ordered the companions to fast on the day of Ashura. And he said, alayhi salatu wasalam, that fasting on the day of Ashura, I believe, with Allah, expiates the sins for your previous year. And this hadith, it is called al-hadith al-musalsal bi yawm Ashura. It's a hadith that we recite and we hear from our teachers on the day of Ashura. Because the Shaykh says, I heard from my Shaykh on the day of Ashura that he heard from his Shaykh on the day of Ashura, and he said all the way back to the Prophet who said, صَوْمُ يَوْمَ عَاشُرَاء إِنِّي أَحْتَسِبُ عَنَّ اللَّهِ أَنْ يَغْفِرَ السَّنَةَ الَّتِي قَبْلَهَا, that I believe that the fasting of Ashura expiates the sins of the previous year. Okay, so that's why we fast on that day, because the Prophet said that's like a freebie. Fast that day and all of your sins are forgiven for the previous day. The other thing to keep in mind is that the fact that the Prophet asked and the Jews said we do this, and the Prophet tried to latch on to that, shows us how the Prophet thought. That he always tries to find points of commonality with people. And that's a trait that we've completely lost. When somebody says Christmas, for example, the Sunni mind, the Sunni Muslim will think, yeah, we have Christmas, it's in the Quran. Because Jesus says in the Quran, Salamun alayya yawma wulidtu wa yawma amutu wa yawma ub'athu hayya. Peace on me the day I was born, the day I die, the day I'm risen again or I'm sent again. And Christmas is the celebration of the birth of Christ. So the way that the Prophet thinks is like that. Yeah, we have that too. But today, the way that we think is, oh, that's haram. It's just we're too lazy to think. That's not how the Prophet was. The Prophet would speak to different Arabs in their dialect. A man came to the Prophet, he said, Hal min ambirri am siyam fil am safar. And in that dialect, instead of saying al, the definite article al, they said am. Hal min ambirri am siyam fil am safar. So the Prophet responded, Laysa min ambirri am siyam fil am safar. So he responded in his dialect. That's like, somebody coming from the South, Tennessee or Mississippi, with a Southern drawl, asking, for a question, and the Imam responding with a Southern drawl, using all of the idioms that person would understand. Because the Prophet ﷺ understood that this is the diversity that Allah has created in humanity. And this is one of Allah's signs that people are different. So when he asked the Jews, why are you doing this? And then he fasted that day, we take from that his desire, his wish, and his MO of trying to get along with people. Despite what happens later in the Sirah for political reasons. But one of the important lessons in the holy day of Ashura is that that's the origin of it. So whenever I meet, all the Jewish people in our community and all the interfaith stuff, I always try to point out, Yom Kippur and Ashura. They're like shocked. Really? They're like, I'd love for you to come and speak. They check, okay, you're a good Muslim. I can talk now. I'd love for you to come and speak to our community. That's how we need to be thinking. Always, where are the points of commonality? Where are the points of commonality? The second thing the Prophet ﷺ, by the way, so that was the basic prima facie hadith of why we fast. So there are all of these other hadiths, and they vary in their strength and weaknesses. But all of these other things happen on the day of Ashura. That Adam was expelled from paradise on Ashura, that he sought forgiveness from Allah on Ashura, that Ibrahim a.s. was put in the fire on Ashura, that Nuh a.s. found land after the flood on the day of Ashura, that the throne was created on Ashura, that all of these days, everything was on the day of Ashura. And then all of this hadith, and some of them are weak or some of them are strong, but they underscore that this is the day of Tawbah, that this is the day of victory, that this is the day of salvation. If you look at all of these stories, Adam being forgiven, Adam and Eve being forgiven on the day of, it's a day of Tawbah, it's a day of forgiveness. And that's what when we fast, we hope that we are forgiven, as the Prophet said. Ibrahim a.s. being cast in the hellfire, and Allah saying, to the hellfire, Kuni bardan wa salamun ala Ibrahim, be peace and quiet and ease for Abraham. And Ibrahim a.s. said that was the most peaceful moment in my entire life when I was thrown in the fire. So this is the day that we commemorate this liberation, this spiritual liberation and forgiveness that we can receive. So that's why we fast on that day. The other thing the Prophet ﷺ said is he said that if you expand at-tawassul on yourself and your family on the day of Ashura, Allah will expand on you the rest of the year. This word at-tawassul, expand, means that you do something extra for yourself and for your family. So maybe you have a special meal. If you're all fasting, then you have a special meal when you break your fast. Maybe you buy some gifts for the children, for yourself, for your spouse. But you do something extra, tawassul. And as I've said every year, and I'll repeat it again, this is the reason behind the Ashura pudding that exists in almost every Muslim culture, is that it comes from this hadith. So some people, they think that the Ashura pudding, we have it because there's a hadith that says when Nuh a.s. found land, everyone in the boat was hungry, so they gathered what they could find, and there were all these nuts and raisins, and this is the pudding. Okay, there's a tradition that says that it might not be the strongest tradition, but the reason we have this Ashura pudding is for this hadith. That this was the Muslims' way, culturally, of interpreting this hadith. That this is, a once-in-a-year dessert. We're going to have it on Ashura. This is how we're going to expand. So this is part of the sunnah, is to do something extra. Now the companions and the tabi'in that narrated this hadith, they said, we've tried this. 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, and we found it to be true. Meaning 1 year they forgot to expand, and it was a tight year. And they realized that all of the khair, all of the goodness that they had the previous year was from this day of Ashura. And I've tried it myself too. I have found that when you do that on the day of Ashura, a little bit extra, you have something, the year becomes expansive in many ways. Maybe your schooling becomes easy, at work you have another opportunity, whatever the case may be. So it doesn't cost that much, it's part of the sunnah, and therefore, as people of the sunnah, we should do it. And the reason I mentioned that is it's important because there is this unfortunate Sunni Shia thing where the Shia interpret this tawassul as somehow Sunnis are happy that Imam al-Hussein was killed in Karbala because that also took place on Ashura. And that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my entire life. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do because there's a hadith that the Prophet said to do that. And because of that, because for Muharram, for the Shia is a big deal, and Ashura is a big deal, and the Husayniyas every day, and they don't want to have anything of happiness in the month of, no one gets married from the Shia community in the month of Muharram, it's all, there's this fallout from that because we are doing the sunnah, that this is because we're happy that Yazid, the punk, I guess that's the most recent thing I can say now, killed the grandson of the Prophet. I mean, are you kidding me? That's ridiculous. Of course we're not happy that happened. That's the tragedy of the highest proportions. That 70 of the family of the Prophet, some people that we love and respect, and that we say alayhim as-salam, were killed. That's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And that's why that's more of what I wanted to address now, because I know that because of social media, it's very, very much out there. There's this thing, why are you fasting? Imam al-Hussein was fasting when he was killed, because it was the day of Ashura, because he followed the sunnah of his grandfather, alayhi salatu wasalam. So we are the people of the sunnah, the whole sunnah, not just some of the sunnah, the whole sunnah, all the sunnah, nothing but the sunnah. That's what it means to be the people of sunnah and jama'ah. So maybe for some of you have no idea what I'm talking about, great, don't worry about it. But for the people that this is an issue, remember that we are the people of sunnah and jama'ah. We are the people that respect all of the Sahaba, despite their shortcomings. And our respect for the Sahaba is because of our respect for the Prophet ﷺ. What makes you a Sahaba, the definition of a Sahaba, is that the Prophet ﷺ looked at you. You became Muslim and lived with that Islam. Not that you looked at the Prophet, because there were Sahaba that were blind. The definition of the Sahaba that Ibn Hajar has for the Sahaba is that the Prophet ﷺ looked at this person. That person was Muslim and lasted without Islam. So just because the Sahaba fought with each other after the passing of the Prophet ﷺ, and there's this great fitna, and we believe, like the Shia, that Imam Ali was right and Muawiyah was wrong, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to go curse Muawiyah or any of us, or Sayyidah Aisha or something. That's really dangerous territory. So we have to be clear that when we celebrate and commemorate, maybe celebrate's the wrong word, when we commemorate the day of Ashura, we're commemorating this, the Sunnah, what the Prophet taught us to fast, tawassul, hasbunallah, ni'mal wakeel, all that kind of stuff that's in the notes of the podcast episode. That's what we're doing. This has nothing to do with Karbala and what happened. But if we want to talk about Karbala, and we should, because it's part of our history, there are many lessons for us to learn. Because the great lesson to learn, other than the sacrifice of Imam al-Hussein, which he, stood for the truth and was killed by tyranny, and Yazid was a disaster. He ruled for 3 years. The first year, he killed Imam al-Hussein. The second year, he attacked Medina. And the third year, he destroyed the Kaaba. And he was always drunk, and he would have a monkey on his shoulder. They would come for him to come and lead the Jummah prayer, and they would find him drunk with a monkey. But Yazid was a disaster. People even questioned whether he was a Muslim. We know that. And Imam al-Hussein stood for the truth, etc. But what happened because of that is that our faith was saved by being usurped by politicians. Because after that tragic event, no longer are the pious amongst us the khulafa. Read the history of the Umayyads, they're all of these 20, 30% type people. Some of them did some good stuff. They were mostly just politicians. But Imam al-Shafi'i and Imam Malik and Imam Ahmad etc. Abu Hanifa, all of the jurists, all of the people, the names that we know, they went another way. They preserved our faith. So our faith was saved by that sacrifice from not being usurped by politics and power. And the enterprise of Islam, the deen of Islam, not the dawla, not the state, the deen of Islam continued and spread after that through the private work of all of the ulama. Yeah, some of them were qadis and stuff like that, but other than that, they were just dedicated to preserving this faith and transmitting it from generation to generation. So there's a lot to be gleaned from that lesson as well. Anyway, I don't want to speak too long about that. I'll stop here. If there are any questions or points of clarification, we can talk about that. Allah Ta'ala. Yeah.
And I saw a ranking of military generals throughout history, and then number 3 was Khalid bin.
There you go, our man.
And then number 2 was Genghis Khan, then number 1 was Napoleon. But if you look at the time that Khalid bin lived, was at the 7th century, while Genghis Khan the 13th century and Napoleon the 18th century. So although he had like 1 millennium before Napoleon, is still
There you go. The worth deserves being studied. Anybody else?
Can you tell us what else to do on so fast on Monday?
Episode 33.
Just give us.
Fast and the tawassul, do something extra. Either you break your fast with special food that you usually don't have, or special food on special silverware. So I was at this Virginia community early today. They told me in some of the Desi cultures, they serve the Ashura pudding on a special plate that they only bring out on the day of Ashura. So bringing out your nice silverware, you're making something special, something extra for yourself, for your family. That's the tawassul.
I don't know anything about the puddings. You have the recipe.
I'm not that's not my no. I'm sure you can get it online, but I'm not. Yeah, I can eat it. But that's it. And I can tell you.
Bringing food to ICCP is okay too, right?
It's always welcome. That's mustahab. That's welcome.
I just want to ask a little bit more about fasting that day, how we should be following that same
التوسع. Because إنما الأعمال بالنيات. يعني if one of these days falls and you have your cycle, and that was your intention, inshallah, you'll get the reward of that. You have it easy. In that case, look at it like that. Same thing like on the day of Arafah, or Nisf Shaban, or something like that, or Isra and Ma'arij, the days that we fast. If it happens, خلاص قدر الله ما شاء فعل. If that was your intention, you can just do extra ibadah that day, and you will get the reward for it, inshallah.
fast only on the 10th or within the 10th and 11th?
You can do only the 10th, you can do 10 and 11, and you can do 9, 10, and 11. Any combination. Because there's some hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said, if I live next year, then I'll add another day to it, so there can be difference between us and the Jews. But he didn't actually do it. So some of the fuqaha, they say because of this hadith, it's better to do that. Some of them say it's only the 10th. So the minimum is just the 10th. And you can add 1 or 2 days to that. That's Monday, inshallah.
Could you repeat your podcast number so that everyone
Okay.
and also for those who do not know how to get your podcast?
So it's episode 33, and the podcast is called Making Sense of Islam. So you can go to the website and listen to it from the website, or you can go to the podcast app on iTunes and get it that way, or Stitcher for Android. And also in the notes of that episode, I have a link to a blog post that has all of the extra things, like saying 70 times Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel, ni'mal mawla wa ni'mal wakeel. So I have that in there, transliterated and in Arabic and translated. So you can do some reciting Surah Al-Ikhlas 1,000 times. There's another dua that you can recite. I have all of that there that's linked. And I have like the Dalil, where all of the evidence for all of these acts come from. So those are like the extra things that you can do that day.
So last year, you wanted to bring Ashura pudding. I hope we can expect that on Monday.
Maybe it'll have to be like Krispy Kreme. Like maybe they'll have an Ashura donut or something special. I don't know. I mean, this year, because it's a Monday, let's see if we can bring something. Yeah. Good to see you.
In terms of expansion, I mean, besides just sort of things that you mentioned, is it also in terms of charity as well, or is it?
Yeah, it's a day of charity too. So there's hadith about visiting the sick and visiting orphans, giving to charity. But that's not expansion. That's like a separate thing. The expansion is like do something for yourself, like treat yourself to something and your family. That's what the hadith is about.
That specifically.
Yeah, that's what expansion means in that sense.
So do the Shias also fast on the day of Ashura?
No. No, they don't. And they find it very strange that we fast. And they find it even more strange when I tell them that Sayyidina Hussein was fasting on the day of Ashura, he was killed. And they say, oh, that's because they were preventing water from getting to his camp. I mean, so it's just, it becomes very polemical at that point. It's just not, they don't. Yeah.
Just to go back to the Sirah, and I was intrigued when you mentioned about the ambassador who was killed. And I think if you come to the recent wars, like the First World War, was actually triggered by the assassination of
Archduke Ferdinand, yeah.
And this brought about the Vienna Convention, about the diplomatic immunity,
Sure, yeah.
where you can, even rebels in countries, if they arrive at an embassy, you cannot be followed.
Yeah.
And also that sort of, and also on the issue of the war crimes, we have Geneva Conventions.
Sure.
I think it's an area for further research, at least to see how we are already ahead of the current.
Yeah, very high. Even more than that is visa. So when a country issues a visa or permission for somebody to travel, in the Sharia understands that as, you have safe passage. This is a pact between the state and the person. So that person is immune. In other words, I can't aggress, I can't, if like I'm in an Arab country, I can't go to the Israeli embassy that's in that Arab country and attack it, other than the fact that it's an embassy. But I also can't attack the Israeli diplomats that have been given permission by this Muslim majority country to represent their country in this country, or anybody else. So it's even more serious. It's not just like war, but if you think about the visa, and in the Sharia, the Arabs before Islam, they had this thing where I would vouch for somebody. So you would be like with me, my jawar. So I say you're with me, everybody's with me, so no one would bother you. And the Sharia affirmed that practice. So many instances we find that some of the people of Quraysh or the enemy combatants would come to Medina, and one of the Muslims that knows that person, they would go to them and say, can you give me safe passage? And they would, and the Prophet ﷺ allowed that safe passage. So it's even more advanced than that. But yeah, so that's very important for as far as like diplomatic relations and how we enter into countries and exit countries, and it's significant.
I'd like to know that Ashura is the month to estimate all the zakat, or you can do it every month or the whole year?
No, your zakat is on when you acquired the money. So everyone has their own schedule. So the minute you have the nisab, the minute you have the minimal zakatable amount, which is like around $5,000, then you count 12 months after that, whenever it happens. So it could be any month, just whenever you get that amount of money, then you start counting 12 months. And then every 12 months you can pay the zakat.
But in my country, we used to do Ashur. Ashur is the zakat in my country.
On the day of Ashura, Maybe because it's like 1 week into Muharram, okay, the new year. But it depends when you get them. Because if you get the money in the Hijjah or the Qa'dah, you still have to let the whole year pass, because maybe before the year you'll spend the money. Yeah, it depends. If you have fixed things, then you know. It's that's my podcast. That's also. So it depends. Sometimes you have fixed investments that you know that it's staying to be invested, so it's easy to calculate. But if somebody gives you a gift or you acquire cash money, then you have to wait for the 12 months to see what happens with that money. Yeah, so you have to think a little bit. Yeah. Yeah.
I asked you like a long time ago about it, but I'm still confused about it.
Alcohol?
No. About the date of the Islamic calendar.
Okay.
Like today, some calendar is the 6th, Muharram is 6, others is 7. And I want to be keen about our screen. It shows probably the correct month, it's 7. But when I look at some other apps, you give me one of those.
Yeah. I have to defer to the board. So whatever system the board, not the board outside, the board of the mosque, i.e. the Muslim. So whatever they've determined is the system that we're going to follow, that's the calendar that we're going to follow.
But they would follow also some other authorities, like for example.
Well, we can't follow 10 authorities.
Like for example, I know we follow the Arab.
Yeah, well, Eid al-Adha is different because it's it's controlled by the people that are performing Hajj.
The other days, I'm confused when I see my screen and I see the other one. I don't know.
Oh, the issue is that the basic way we determine the beginning of the month is to physically see the new moon.
Yes.
Okay? And there are ways to do that. Not you go outside in the parking lot here, you're not going to see the new moon here. You have to go where there's no artificial light. The issue is, where is the role of calculations in determining the month? So the fuqaha of previous generation, they debated this issue. And some of the madhahib allowed the use of calculations. Like in my madhab and the Shafi'i madhab, we allow the use of calculations. The other madhahib, they don't allow the use of calculations. So this is really where the issue is coming from. But at the end of the day, it's really all ijtihad. Because even when you see the moon, it could be cloudy. Yeah, maybe I didn't see it here, but someone else. So it's really a form of ijtihad. So when you have an issue that's based on ijtihad, we have to follow one system of ijtihad, and we agreed with it, and that's what we stick with.
In practical, we have to follow an authority. They are the one who are doing this type of things.
We should follow
which one?
I think in this mosque they follow the ISNA calendar, correct?
Yeah, Islamic Finder.
Islamic Finder.
Yeah, and Islamic Pro.
Some people like that, some people won't be happy, but that's the system that we've taken. I personally, I don't, I would want us to follow a different system. The problem is that the system that we're following here, so many other masajid follow. So I can't, spoil what this mosque is doing, and, then they won't ask me to come back. So it's an issue of ijtihad. So this is something that, I'm happy complying with the system that we have here. So we don't create more fitna.
It's Muslim Pro.
Muslim Pro. No.
And is it allowed for the whole Muslim, the Ummah, to have 2 different calendars in the whole year? And today, some parts of some Muslims believe.
Yes, the lunar month can start at different times in different places, of course. Because to sight the new moon, there's like 16 conditions that can affect the sighting of the new moon. Which is why, when you think about it, the calculations are not really calculations. All the calculations tell you is when the moon will be born vis-a-vis the sunset of that day. But no calculation on Earth, no technology, no science on Earth can tell you definitively you can see the moon here. Because it could be cloudy, it could be raining, it could be there's too much artificial light. So wherever the place is that has no artificial light is too far away. We don't have there are too many conditions: the atmosphere, the pressure, the moisture, the humidity. All of these things affect the sight of the new moon. So what all the calculation tells you is when the moon is going to be born. So the ISNA and that side of it, they say, okay, if the moon is born after the Maghrib of that day, even if it's like 1 minute, khalas, it's the new month. The more traditional ulama will be like, we have to see it. One minute is not enough time to see it because there's still light. It has to be maybe like 15 minutes, 12 minutes, 15 minutes, and then I can see it. And then, like this last Ramadan, they saw the moon here. In Maryland, they saw the moon. Separate from when the calendar we followed at this masjid. People actually went out and they saw the moon. That's why I didn't sleep that night until Eid. And then, like right before Fajr, some committee, Hilal committee somewhere, they're like, no, they didn't see the moon, they saw Saturn, or they saw Jupiter or something. And they start fighting back and forth. Then you're like, well, I don't know, what is it? Did they see it? Did they not see it? Is it Eid tomorrow? Is it not Eid tomorrow? So it becomes very confusing. So for masajid to fight, you can't ask the whole community to stay until like 3, 4 in the morning and I'll tell you if it's fasting tomorrow or not. It's not going to work. Especially in Ramadan, it's not going to work because if tomorrow's not Eid, that means we have to fast. So that's why the masjid and the board leans towards we're just going to follow this system so we know when the Eid is from the beginning. And that's fine, because it's a form of ijtihad. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, the mujtahid, if he makes ijtihad and he's wrong, he gets 1 reward. If he makes ijtihad and he's right, he gets 2 rewards. And in the narration of Dar al-Qutni, if the mujtahid makes ijtihad and he's right, he gets 10 rewards. So the point is that for us to make ijtihad, to try. So that's the story on the... You're not happy. You can talk to Brother Mohsen. I'm out. That's above me. I'm just the entertainment. That's it. Yes.
I have a question. If someone calls you out of the way, what can you do to like them in your grade or stay close to them spiritually?
Anything you can do from an ibadah point of view, the reward of that can go to the deceased. You can read Quran, you can give a charity, you can make dua for them, you can endow sadaqah jariyah, you can do give a charity that will constantly like to the mosque so it's always there. And anything that you can do for yourself, you can do for the deceased. Because the Prophet ﷺ told us that we can perform Hajj for the deceased. Right? If our parents or somebody close to us dies, and they have not performed Hajj, we can perform Hajj for them. And the Hajj contains all of the acts of worship. It contains prayer, sadaqah, siyam, tawaf, sa'i, nahar, everything. So the ulama said, therefore, all of it goes to the deceased. That means every part of it goes to the deceased as well. And that's the greatest dalil that anything that we do in our spiritual life, we can donate that to the deceased. So anything and everything that your heart is inclined to do for the deceased. Yeah.
Along the same lines, the ruling for the morning, like so the 3 days and 30 days.
Morning is an M-O-R-N-I-N-G.
Morning for someone who's deceased.
Well, M-O-U-R. Yeah.
So what exactly is? I mean, what is there a definition?
Yeah, the sunnah is we give 3 days to visit the family of the deceased. So it's not like a big rush. But it's really cultural too, I think. We have to do what you mean if you're somebody in your family dies, you mourning?
Isn't there a limit of the number of days that you're allowed to mourn for these?
Oh no, it's the 3 days that you visit somebody to give your condolences.
Oh.
Not the mourning. You might mourn the rest of your life. If somebody goes to that, that's natural. So
the 3 days is to visit somebody else's
Yeah. So like say somebody in my family dies and you want to come and give your condolences. So I would leave my house open for 3 days.
I see.
Or else it just becomes too much. Like, oh, you're like, busy. I'll see you like at the end of the month. So that means I'll have like a constant flow of people coming in and out. I can't handle that. So the sunnah will make it 3 days so that the community can, maybe help facilitate that because the family's in mourning. So we'll like bake food for them. And I mean, now it's like the opposite. Now we make food and you come, it's like a party. But what's supposed to happen is that we go to them for 3 days and we give them food so that people can come, give their condolences and leave. That's like the sunnah structure of the mourning. Or let's not say mourning is wrong. It would be condolences. As far as mourning, if somebody close to me dies, I might mourn for the rest of my life. And that's okay. The Prophet ﷺ, he kept mentioning Khadijah so much that Sayyidah Aisha, she said, the only person I was ever jealous of was Khadijah, even though I never saw her. Because everything the Prophet ﷺ, Khadijah used to do this, and she used to say this, and all this reminds me of Khadijah. So the Prophet ﷺ was clearly mourning the loss of his wife, even though it happened years and years ago. So from a personal point of view, that's different. That's fine. The 3 days is let's say condolences would be a better word. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense.
So, you also mentioned the deed versus the dollar.
Yeah.
That it was the Imam Suri inspired the religion. Nothing to do with the dollar. Will that be now, one could actually turn it around and say, when the secularists talk about separation of church and state, how will it be?
Yeah, so actually in my thesis, that's what I argued. I argued that separation took place in the early period of Islam. Not just because of the death or the massacre of Imam Hussein, but for other reasons. The Khalifa came to Imam Malik, and he told Imam Malik, I want to make the Muwatta that Imam Malik put together, like the standard for the whole Ummah. And Imam Malik refused. He said, you can't do that. And those type of incidents, I talk about that, those type of incidences, my interpretation of it means that split between church and state happened for us early on. Now the dawla is very important because the dawla provides the infrastructure for Islam to be practiced. You need, mosques and hospitals and schools and there has to be qadis and there has to be some interaction. I'm not saying that it's completely, the idea that it's completely different, that's also false. But what makes Islam spread and continue to thrive is the deen, is the people that are dedicated to teaching the deen, not the dawla. I mean, you need the dawla, but we're here, the dawla is not Muslim here, and we're fine. This is like Darul Islam for us. We're doing great, mashallah, alhamdulillah. So, yeah, so that's something that I argue, and I understand that when I say people don't really get it. So I think I need to find a better way of making my point, because people are too used to let's go protest and activism, and we have to Bernie Sanders and the highlight of the Islamic convention is Bernie Sanders, all that kind of that's nonsense, man. That's we're not going to get anywhere with that. That's not the way of the Salaf at all. That's not it's not. Anyway, that's my. I'm publishing my thesis now, so I'll get you a copy, inshallah, if it ever gets done. It's going to be very expensive. So I'm going to just get up one copy from them and we'll go to Cairo. I'll make like 400 copies and I'll just spread it around. Because I was so excited it was going to get published, and then when the guy told me the number, no one's going to buy this. So I'll copyright, I'll infringe on my own copyrights and I'll give everyone copies.
PDF.
I don't care. Did you have something to say? Alcohol?
It's about the Karbala, about the Shia, but he said that before people were fasting, and now they are not. They forget what happened between Rasul to that event. I don't know, that's what I couldn't get it. How come they erased everything that happened now?
Well, it's a little bit more dark than that, which is why we don't like to talk about it. Because essentially, and I'm not saying all the Shia say this, but what the argument traditionally was is that the order of the Khulafa was wrong from the beginning. That Abu Bakr shouldn't have been the Khalifa, and then Umar, it should have been Imam Ali first. For like a lot of reasons. So on the way back from the Hajj, they stopped at Ghadir Khum, this Ghadir Khum, this well, and the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Ali is my like inheritor, and whoever is with Ali is like with me, which is a Sahih hadith. Imam As-Suyuti says the hadith is Sahih, but it does not mean that Imam Ali is the next Khalifa. It means if we understand it as Imam Ali, as the Prophet ﷺ said elsewhere, is the inheritor of the teachings of the Prophet. Ana Madinatul Ilm wa Ali babuha. I am the Medina, the city of knowledge, and Ali is its door. And all of our chains of transmission in Tasawwuf, in our spiritual sciences, most of them they go back through Imam Ali. That's what it means. But when the Prophet ﷺ was sick, he physically told Abu Bakr to lead the prayer. Why didn't he tell Imam Ali? So the fact that the Sahaba messed up, for us, is all of Islam would crumble. Because that means our whole religion is based on this one concept called ijma'. That every generation agrees to something. And the Prophet ﷺ said the Ummah will never make ijma' on something that is wrong. So if we say that after the passing of the Prophet ﷺ that Sayyidina Abu Bakr, it was a mistake that he was the Khalifa, then what we are saying is that the Sahaba made a mistake. Now if the Sahaba made a mistake in that, then how can I trust that the Quran is the Quran? Because the Sahaba are the ones that transmitted for us the Quran. How do I know that the Hadith is the Hadith? Because the Sahaba gave us the Hadith. So it's a much more problematic argument. It's not that they forget, it's that they say that the order was wrong.
No. Besides that, I'm sure that the Imam Ali he was fasting also. So why did it still difficult?
Because the Hadith sources for the Shia are different than our Hadith sources. They only take from certain Sahaba. They don't take the Hadith that are narrated from the Sahaba that they considered were with Muawiyah and Muawiyah's camp. That's essentially why. So they're like our Hadith are like this, and their Hadith are like this. There's overlap, of course, but it's not as full as our sources. Now I understand. I thought you read something else about the fasting. So maybe that's why. Anybody else? Okay. Allah Ta'ala.
الله أكبر الله أكبر